It is so difficult to run your rental business as a business if all your tenants have agreed to different rules. That doesn't work. How important is it that all of your tenants have agreed to the same rules? How do they do that? The lease. The lease is the rules and agreements that you've made with your tenant, the things you've agreed to do, the things that they've agreed to do, who covers what, who pays for what, who's responsible for what. And it is so important that all your tenants have agreed to the same rules. If you have different tenants on different leases, it's going to be not running a rental business. It's going to be managing chaos, really. How much is the late fee? When is the late fee charged? What's the grace period? Is it a percentage of rent? Is it a percentage of the rent due? Is it a percentage of back rent? Is it a flat fee? What happens if there's a pet at the property? What can you do as a landlord if you find a pet on the property that's not supposed to be there? What have they agreed to? Are the washer and dryer, if something happens to them, are you obligated as a landlord to repair them? Etc., etc., etc. We need to keep everybody on the same page. And in order to do that, we need to keep everybody on the same lease. And as you update your leases, we got to keep those lease renewals up to date. That's going to keep you protected. That's going to keep you profitable. And it's going to save you time, effort, and energy. My name is Chatto, and I've been a landlord for 25 years, and I've messed this up. I've added stuff to leases, I've switched leases, and I didn't keep everybody on the same lease, and it makes life so difficult. Here's the issue. You buy a property, and there's a tenant in place, and you inherit that tenant and the lease that the old landlord had with that tenant, and whatever that lease says, and whatever it doesn't say, right, all that you're inheriting. Right now, you start landlording, you get your lease together, and you say, okay, you know what? I want to add this clause in because this is going to be helpful to me. So you add that clause in. Then you add another clause in. Then you add another clause in. Now, you have the old tenants that are on the old lease 2 revisions ago, and they don't have the same rules as the new tenants that you're putting in your rental next week. So that becomes an issue. And the problem is every time something comes up, not every time, but a lot of times something comes up, you need to go back and look at your lease. Oh yeah, that tenant was on the old lease we had 5 years ago when we thought it would be a good idea to include the washer and dryer as something with the rental that we would have to repair. Ugh. Now we got to repair the thing because that's what the lease says. Well, we don't normally do that anymore. It's just every time something comes up, you need to see, okay, well, what lease are they on, and what are the rules within that lease that I need to follow that's going to govern this situation that came up. So the goal here, right, is you want to keep these properties long term, and you want to keep them long term so that you can build wealth. I think that's the goal. But in the course of keeping these properties long term and building that wealth, you don't want to create headaches for yourself. That's the last thing you want. Obviously, I'm such an advocate for just anybody picking up a few rental properties. Even just 2 or 3 rental properties are going to so much change your outlook on retirement. And I preach that as much as I can. But that being said, we need to run it, even if you only have a few properties, as a business. It's so important to do things the right way. So there are 2 big things, 2 big reasons that you need a uniform lease for all your tenants. Consistency is the big thing. If you have a uniform lease, you have consistency. Every tenant has agreed to the same rules, and you know the rules, and you know how to enforce them because you know your lease probably a lot better than your tenants do. And the second thing is it gives you a little bit of leverage. When you have a reasonable tenant and they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, and or like they think something should be a different way. Right? And you can point to the lease. You can point to that paper lease they signed. Hey, this is the rules we agreed to, right? That goes a long way for a reasonable tenant to, say, oh, okay, you're right. I did agree to that. Thing is, it's not like magic. A lease isn't magic, right? Tenants are going to, unfortunately, still do what they want to do. But when you have it in writing, at least you have something, and that changes the conversation, and it gives you a little bit more, ammunition if things really start going extremely sideways. It's going to help you to have a good lease with agreements in place when you move forward and you run your business. Now, a lease is so much more than right? So like, let's look at these agreements. A lease is so much more than, okay, this is how much you're rented for. It's a 1-year lease. This is your name. This is the landlord's name, and this is the property address. It's so much more than that. If you really think about it, the lease is actually just like a rule book on how we're going to go, how we're going to work together, how we're going to interact as a landlord and tenant, what the rules are, and how the rules are enforced. So, couple points that I want to make about putting together your ideal lease is number one, make sure the rules that are in your lease are legal in your area. You don't want to be putting clauses in your lease that are not legal. Number two, what's the deal with pets? What happens if you find a pet? You want to make sure you include that. I strongly recommend, where applicable and where allowed, you want mandatory renter's insurance for all your tenants. It's going to save you so much heartache if, when something does occur, and it will, your tenants have good renter's insurance. Who's responsible for a clogged drain? That's huge. Who's responsible for pest control? Again, like I said, the washer and dryer, we don't include those anymore. What happens if the washer or dryer breaks? What's the rules around that? How much is the late fee? When does the late fee hit? What is the fee if you break the lease early? What's the charge that's allowed to go along with that? And what happens if you move another occupant in? Those are just like a starting point. So all these are things that you need to think about when putting together your ideal lease. So let's be proactive and take a look at what some of the things we can think about when we're putting together this ideal uniform lease. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure, like, what about starting with maybe a state realtor lease? That usually, in most states, is pretty fair to both the tenant and to the landlord. It may not be in your area, but it might be a good starting point is to use a lease that is approved by the board of realtors. Like, that might be a good starting point, and then maybe you just add in all these other provisions that you're thinking you want to get added in. And obviously, like I said earlier, you want to make sure that those provisions are actually enforceable and legal in your municipality. You may want to go to a local RIA and find out what lease all the landlords are using. Sometimes there's a local guy who's been a landlord for a long time and he came up with a great lease, and he might sell it as a package through your local realtor, right? You might have a local attorney that does evictions and he says, you know what, I've been through all these evictions, use my lease. But you want to make sure you put together a strong, ideal lease. And whenever a lease comes up for renewal, right? Whenever a lease comes up for renewal and you re-sign with the tenant, if this tenant is on an old lease or has something, and you've made a lot of changes, just sign them to a whole new lease instead of a renewal. Start over, get a fresh lease, get them to agree to it, and now you have a fresh lease in writing. And any tenant that has maybe a lease from a previous landlord or something that you don't even know what it is and it's not a good lease, you want to get them to sign your new ideal lease as soon as possible. The lease renewal is another thing that you need to pay close attention to, because every time you update your lease, right, you think of a clause or something happens, you're like, oh crap, I didn't have a clause regarding this thing that happened. Right now, you need to add that to your lease. But all your tenants, as they do lease renewals, aren't going to have that clause in. So you're going to have to add that clause into your lease renewals, or get these people completely signed up on your new lease and make them sign a fresh lease every year. It is a lot easier to send a 2-page lease renewal with a couple of clauses that you've added in over time to keep everyone uniform. But it might even be a better policy just to, every time somebody renews, it's a whole new lease that gets signed. And that way you constantly have people on the same page. That's up to you. It's a little bit difficult and overwhelming to send people 15, 20-page lease for every renewal. It's a lot easier to get them to sign a 2-page lease with a couple things added into it. So just keep that in mind. But lastly, in all of this, you need to keep organized on top of the whole thing. You got to make sure all your leases are scanned in, that they're electronic, that they're backed up, and they're organized and easy to access. Right? When these people come up for renewals, you need to make sure, okay, cool, which lease is this person on? Oh, they're on my old lease from 5 years ago. Might be time to sign our new lease with them. Or they got a lease with the old landlord. Definitely got to get them signed up on my new lease. And you just got to be organized come renewal time. You got to know when your renewals are. You got to make sure that you're giving them plenty of notice. whatever it is in your area, usually like 60 days notice at least, might be 3 months, depending on your area. And you need to keep all of this on track and organized. So just as a quick recap, right? The lease isn't the paperwork you have to do, right? Oh my gosh, I got to make a lease. Dude, it is so important. It's the playbook. Every tenant on the same lease, every conversation starts from the same place, same rules, same operating procedures. It's so important. And here's the big lesson. Don't get sloppy. Don't let inherited leases or old outdated leases roll over, right? You got to get everybody on the same lease, know what you've got, get everybody on a renewal, bring everybody current, and get everybody on the same rules. That being said, I always have some good stuff for you over at chatwithchatto.com. First of all, there's a link on that website where you can book a call with me if you want to sit down and have a conversation and see if there's something I can do to support you in creating wealth and legacy in your life with a couple of single family properties, couple of rentals. I want to support people in building that wealth and building that legacy. And secondly, I have the property walkthrough checklist that I put together. It's great. I have it with me every time I go to a property, and it helps me catch preventative maintenance, helps me prevent work orders and service calls. It's great. You've been hanging out with me about 11 minutes now. I appreciate it. Hopefully it was of value to you. Apparently with the algorithm, like and subscribe, that would be epic. That would be awesome. That would help me get some traction in the algorithm. And I look forward to catching you on the next episode of Chat with Chatto.